Well, everyone, it's time for us to go ahead and do another camera comparison between the iPhone 14 Pro Max, iPhone 13 Pro Max, 12 Pro Max, and the iPhone 11 Pro Max. Now, in this comparison, I just took a few different photos, nothing crazy, but before we look at the photos, there are so many differences between the actual hardware themselves that we kind of have to go ahead and spend some time talking about them because the majority of the comparison is between each individual camera. Now, the cool and interesting thing between all these different, 1099, phones that Apple made from 2019 onwards is that the camera capability is kind of the same. So they all have the same types of lenses, but obviously with the 14 Pro Max, they are much bigger lenses and much better lenses for sure. The 14 Pro Max is going to have the best camera out of all of these for 100% fact. But there are still some similarities between even an 11 Pro Max and the 14 Pro Max. Starting off, the camera lenses on all of them, the capability is exactly the same. So we have telephoto lenses on all of them, we have wide angle lenses on all of them, and we have ultra wide cameras on all of them. So they all can do 0.5x zoom, which is great, but some phones, the lower end ones can do 10x zoom, where the newer ones like the 13 Pro Max and 14 Pro Max can do 15x zoom. So that is something that's really cool. The telephoto lenses of nowadays are definitely much better at zooming in a lot more. So you have a lot more zooming in capability on something like the 14 Pro Max than on something like the 11 Pro Max. So that is one big thing to keep in mind. If you're wanting to get a phone that's going to have the most amount of capability, you're definitely going to be getting that with the 14 Pro Max. On top of that, there are some features that the 13 Pro Max and 14 Pro Max have that the 11 Pro Max and 12 Pro Max do not have. One of these things is cinematic mode. We do not have cinematic mode on the 12 or the 11s, and personally, I think that's okay, it's whatever, but it is a really cool feature. It is pretty much like portrait mode for video, and it blurs out the background of subjects and everything, and that is a really cool thing. Unfortunately, we do not have that on the iPhone 12 Pro Max or 11 Pro Max, but on top of that, we also don't have the action mode, which is a new feature on the 14 Pro Max. We do not have that type of capability on the 11 Pro Max, 13 Pro Max, or 11 Pro Max either. So that is probably another thing that some people may prefer, but some other similarities. I mean, you are getting 4K at 60 on the front and on the back of all these phones. So if you ever wanted to film in that type of resolution on all these types of cameras, well, you do have that type of capability, which that in and of itself is really, really cool. And something I've seen in a lot of other cameras that I've personally tested so far is that the similarity between an 11 Pro Max and a 12 Pro Max, there's a lot of similarity there. Between a 13 Pro Max and 14 Pro Max, there's a lot of similarity there as well, but it's the jump from a 12 Pro Max to a 13 Pro Max, that is probably where you're going to be getting the biggest jump. If you're going from one phone to the other, the 12 Pro Max to a 13 Pro Max, in my opinion, is probably the biggest differentiating factor, at least from what I can see. So, in terms of that kind of covers up the hardware, everything on the outside surrounding these cameras. Now, if we take a look at my screen right here, I have 4 different blocks set up for each individual iPhone. You can see in the corners of which iPhone is which, but with the iPhone 14 Pro Max, we have the top left, the iPhone 13 Pro Max top right, the iPhone 12 Pro Max bottom left, and the iPhone 11 Pro Max bottom right. Now, I will say with my 12 Pro Max, there must have been some glare on that type of lens or something like that, because normally those photos don't look, this type of washed out. So I'm not too sure what's going on there. I think there may be an issue of some sort. So do keep in mind, if you're rocking a 12 Pro Max, the photos are going to look better than the 11 Pro Max, but in this case, I don't know what's going on here. Now, with the 14 Pro Max, I will say with this first photo, if we kind of just zoom in here, one thing that I noticed is that the 14 Pro Max, when you're in the non-macro mode, so I took these all off that little macro mode option, for some reason the 11 Pro Max, for some reason the 14 Pro Max doesn't want to look, I don't know why, just for some reason I kept having to tap to focus and it just was not looking good for the 14 Pro Max, which is weird. I think that software needs to be improved a little bit. The 13 Pro Max had this issue too at launch, but it ended up getting fixed over time. I feel like the colors on the 13 Pro Max look great. Again, with the 12 Pro Max, not too sure what's going on here. I don't know what needs to happen here. With the 11 Pro Max, this photo still looks pretty good. I will say out of all of them, the 14 Pro Max is the one that looks to be, at least in my opinion, the one that needs to be a little bit more improved in that macro mode option. Now this next photo, more or less the same thing. You can see for yourself here again that I had to zoom out a lot on this 14 Pro Max photo to make it look even kind of good. On the 13 Pro Max, it really centered off in the middle, which was nice. The 12 Pro Max, again, same as that grainy thing. With the 11 Pro Max, looks very, very good in my opinion. between all of them, like I said before, the 11 Pro Max and the 14 Pro Max, there's a big jump here. But the 13 Pro Max and 14 Pro Max look very, very similar. But the thing I want to note again is look how far I had to go and zoom out for the photo to look good on the 14 Pro Max. Again, this is a software thing. I think Apple just needs to fix it again. They fixed it. There was an issue on the 13 Pro Max early on. They fixed it. But disabling that macro toggle can give you some weird effects that you're going to have to kind of tinker around with. Now, this next photo, like I mentioned before, one of my favorite photos to take. And between all of them, very weird stuff. So with the 14 Pro Max, nothing crazy, it kind of looks exactly how I would expect. With the 13 Pro Max, that photo looks really, really good. I think with the 12 Pro Max and 11 Pro Max, very similar, nothing super different here. I will say the 11 Pro Max is definitely looking much better than I thought this photo was going to look like. With the 14 Pro Max, I think the 13 Pro Max photo looks the best out of all these. Again, the macro toggle was turned off. So there is something with that macro toggle when you're turning off that option where it just doesn't look as good as something like the 13 Pro Max without having that toggle off. So I think, again, it just needs to be improved on that camera side, but that is one thing that kind of stood out to me as well. Now this next photo, again, just in direct sunlight with all these types of photos, and it looks to me that the 11 Pro Max and the 12 Pro Max look very similar, not really too much different between these all. The colors look great. I think even on the 11 Pro Max, the colors look great. With the 13 Pro Max and with the 14 Pro Max, this color looks great on both of these photos. If I'm looking at something like the 14 Pro Max, if we go and look at it right here, and we look at something like the 11 Pro Max, I'm definitely seeing a much more blurred out background on the iPhone 14 Pro Max, but I'm also seeing the coloring, it just looks so beautiful and cinematic on the iPhone 14 Pro Max right here. With the 13 Pro Max, I'm also kind of seeing the same thing. I'm kind of seeing that the background looks a little bit more, I guess, colorful on the background of the iPhone 13 Pro Max. I'm definitely seeing that the coloring looks a lot more colorful on the iPhone 13 Pro Max, which looks great on the background, but I think the photo looks better overall on the iPhone 14 Pro Max, at least in this example. So that's probably another thing that kind of should, stand out to some people. Now this next photo I took of the sky, this is usually not a crazy, impactful photo that I take, but it's one of those ones that, if you're in direct sunlight, this is kind of an idea of what you could be getting. And I think all these look pretty much the same. One thing that I'm noticing though, if we look at, the left side of this specific photo on all these specific phones, I'm seeing that, again, with the 12 Pro Max, I don't know what's going on with that camera, but with the iPhone 11 Pro Max, that photo looks a little bit more, I don't know what the right terminology is, but it looks a little bit more washed out. Same thing with the 12 Pro Max. Both the 13 Pro Max and the 14 Pro Max look great in this specific example. Both these photos look sharp. And I will say with the sky itself, they all look kind of the same. But I do think if I'm looking at, the left photo and I'm looking at this photo, all of them look great. But I think the 13 Pro Max here, again, looks to be better. I don't know what it is, but the 13 Pro Max camera has been, exponentially better than I was expecting. Now this next photo, again, I had to kind of tinker around with it with the macro mode. And all these look great. I don't really think any of these photos stand out to me that, one is exponentially way better than the other one. We're looking at the 14 Pro Max, maybe this one is going to be better overall, like the coloring looks great. I think the 13 Pro Max looks great, and I do think between both these, the 11 Pro Max also looks good as well. I don't know why I took this one at this angle versus the other ones, but I would say, if you handed me one photo and you had to tell me, like what the differences are, the only one that even kind of stands out to me a little bit more is with the 13 Pro Max, because that macro toggle, when you turn it off, in my opinion, it gives me a much better photo. With the 14 Pro Max, when you turn that macro toggle off, it just doesn't give you as great of a photo as you would expect. So I think overall, to kind of sum up this whole entire comparison, I think the 14 Pro Max has the highest potential of probably giving the best photos, but because of that macro toggle, because I'm taking a lot of close-up shots, but even with photos that I wasn't taking the close-up shots, things like the sky, some other photo I think I took of the flowers, it doesn't give me as great of a photo quality, I would say, as compared to the 13 Pro Max. So that is the one thing that kind of keeps, kind of standing out to me. But I do think the 14 Pro Max has potential of improving. I think that is one thing that I kept seeing with the 14 Pro Max. Like, it can definitely get better throughout time. But I do think out of all these, the 13 Pro Max photos probably look the best, which is very interesting. Followed by the 14 Pro Max, followed by the 11 Pro Max and 12 Pro Max kind of in tied place. But the 11 Pro Max also shocked me today about how good of a photo camera that thing still is. So in terms of everything, that kind of covers it up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that helps me so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.